Okay, what I want to do really quickly is give you guys sort of like my spiel on quote integration. Um, Quote integration, if you are in my 101 class, is not necessarily something that you absolutely have to know until 102, but because I think it's really easy to learn and it just kind of forces you to do it, that I make you do it in 101. And then once you get to 102, you have it, and it's just one less thing you have to worry about. So fortunately for you, even though you think unfortunately, you have to quote for the remainder of the semester. So from this point on, the moment this video gets posted, from this point on, for the remainder of the semester, you need to always have in-text citations, you need to always quote correctly, and you need to always have a works cited page. So let's get into it. So the three biggest reasons that you're going to want to quote is obviously you want to use the ideas that you present in your writing, and you want to support them with quotes. They also give your ideas or arguments authority. It shows your readers that you've done your homework and that you have read from a wide variety of sources, and you are using those sources to substantiate your own claims. And again, they just provide legitimacy and credibility to your own writing. And there are two different types of quotes, and I think their difference is relatively obvious. Indirect quoting is presenting an author's words in your own words. This is also called a summary or a paraphrase. You guys have been doing a lot of summary. Summary is when you're kind of presenting larger chunks of the work, and then paraphrase is when you are rewording smaller portions of the work. So, for example, you have this quote over here to the right of Albert Camus, good writer. He says, "A free press can, of course, be good or bad, but most certainly without freedom, the press will never be anything but bad." So for an indirect quote, basically what you do is you just interpret those words of his and turn them into your own words, but you have to give him credit right here where you have Camus claims. This Camus claims right here is called a signal phrase, and every time you use work from someone else, you need to have a signal phrase here. Or obviously you have a direct quote, which is a verbatim repeat with quotation marks of the quote. So you still have your signal phrase right here, but then you have author, verb, comma, space, one quote. Then you dump the entire quote in, blah, 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 period. And then you have to pretend that there's a double quote right here because there should be one. Okay, so there are 6 rules for quoting. The first rule is that quotation is your last choice, okay? Don't use a quote unless you can say it in your own words. You want to quote infrequently. Once a page is plenty in a student paper, okay? And you always want to remember the 2/3 rule. The 2/3 rule is basically if you have an essay and you type it out and you print it out, and you take a highlighter, any color is fine, you take a highlighter and you highlight all of the places in which the sources are not your own, meaning you're using sources and the work is not your own. You should be able to hold that picture up and visually see, and 2/3 of it should be white, okay? At minimum, 2/3 should be white. The other 1/3 can be from other sources, and that 1/3 includes direct and indirect quoting, okay? A lot of times students make this error. They will end a paragraph with a quote, and when you end a paragraph with a quote, you've done 2 things wrong. Okay, you've expected the quote to make the point for you. You haven't explicated it. Okay, and you also haven't built in a transition. So never, ever, ever end a paragraph with a quote. Okay, you also don't ever really want to use long quotes. 2 to 3 sentences is maximum length for a short undergrad paper. Another thing you need to be aware of is any quote over 4 lines long, 1, 2, 3, 4. And by 4 lines long, I mean when you put it in Times New Roman and it's longer than 4 lines, you need to block it. And if you don't know how to block quote, you need to go look it up at the Purdue OWL. Okay, you are responsible for block quoting those quotes. And then you must always explain how a quote supports your argument or how you disagree with the quote. I also didn't know as I started this lecture that I'm losing my voice. Okay, so there's 3 basic ways, okay? You have introduction, comma, quote, okay? Or you can do introduction, comma, colon right here, and then quotation. Or you just do your direct quote without having any sort of a comma. You use the word that or to that can sometimes stand in for that comma. So St. Paul declared that it is better to marry than to burn. And then punctuation, okay, you only put quotation marks around what is actually quoted. All periods and commas placed inside terminal quotation marks. So for example, you have helpful words, period, quote, not helpful words, quote, period. The only exception to this rule, and it is actually one that you will use all the time, is when you're using in-text citations. The in-text citations always go after the quotation mark and before the period. So right here, in between the quote and the period, you would put your in-text citations, which would be the parentheses, author name, page number. For short phrases or words which are integrated into the sentence, no punctuation may be needed. So for example, he referred to blood, sweat, and tears when rallying the English to war. In there, you don't need any additional punctuation. Quotes and paragraphs, I have 3 rules, okay? And if you follow and you remember these 3 steps, you'll be golden, I promise you. So first you have to set it up. Okay, you just have your introductory phrase, Dana Harker said, comma, space, whatever. And then you use it. So you actually put the quote in, okay, and then you have the in-text citation with it. So now we have Dana Harker said, comma, space, quote. Right here's my quote. But then what you have to do is you have to explain it. And this is the step number 3 is the step that nobody ever does. Well, you do later, but at the beginning you don't do it. You just assume that your quote stands for itself. You haven't connected it to your idea. You haven't connected it to your thesis, your paragraph, nothing. You just kind of quote and run. And always remember that you have to explain it. You have to explain its relevance to the paragraph. It's your job. Okay, don't make the reader interpret it, because oftentimes your reader doesn't do what you want them to do. So you have to make sure that they don't have the freedom to interpret. So here's an example of set it up, even though these are a little scattered. You have all of these signal phrases here, okay? Reasons, refutes, rejects, demonstrates, disputes, emphasizes. That's the set it up part, okay? So you have source, verb, source, verb, source, verb. One thing you want to always try to avoid is says or talks about. Talks about is the biggest one. Don't ever write Jane Doe talks about, okay? It's not academic, it's lazy, and it's just kind of passive. So now that you know that you can't use talks about as a signal phrase, you can pull from one of these lovely ones on the list. Okay, and then we have our use it. So we have, excuse me, the according to Jane Doe, it's set up. Then we're going to use it. There are numerous supporters and an equal amount of those opposed to the proposed bill that would allow all dogs to carry weapons. Then you'll notice, you can't see what I'm pointing to, sorry. You'll notice the double quote, the space, the in-text citation, and then the period. And then we have the most important part, okay? You cannot let it stand alone. You have to interpret it. So you have to obviously explain it, connect it, and comment on its significance. So we have, according to Jane Doe, there are numerous supporters and an equal amount of those opposed to the proposed bill that would allow all dogs to carry weapons. The following sentence is the explain it sentence, okay? And it says, any issue with as many opposing votes as supporting votes, especially one allowing dogs to carry AK-47s, will certainly elicit an interesting debate. Explaining quotes, a good way to kind of set yourself up for that next step is just always use phrases like in other words and making this comment, the essence of this person's argument is, here, subject is implying, okay? If you kind of just set yourself up to always have those types of introductory phrases after your double quotes, you should be good. You should be able to have that explaining part down. So just kind of get in the habit of remembering that third step of explaining your quotes. And so you can triac with a quote. You can have your topic sentence. One of the most highly contentious issues in the Senate is Bill 437, okay, and then we're going to reduce it. Bill 437 would allow for any domestic animal to be armed as a means for their owners to better protect themselves against possible assaults. Great. Now we're going to illustrate it, okay? We're going to illustrate our point with an actual example. And then in the case of triac and quoting, the illustration is just the direct quote itself or the paraphrase, okay? According to Jane Doe, there are numerous supporters and an equal amount of those opposed to the proposed bill that would allow all dogs to carry weapons. And then we have our analysis. And in a triac paragraph with a quote, the analysis is just the in other words, okay? Any issue with as many opposing votes as supporting votes, especially one allowing dogs to carry AK-47s, will certainly elicit an interesting debate. Great. Now we conclude, okay? We finish our Uh-oh, sorry about that. We finish our paragraph, we wrap it up, and we're going to move on. Okay, so we can say, while the Senate is discussing expanding the Second Amendment to include domestic animals, one might wonder how this will affect the animals themselves. Then the next paragraph would naturally be about how animals would be affected if they had to carry, if they could carry AK-47s, which would be a great thing, right? Tips to avoid treating orphan quotes badly. Okay, only really, really mean people would treat orphans badly. Don't just pick quotes at random. Okay, just because it's in your source and mentions your topic, it doesn't make it the best example to use. Another thing is don't always get locked into using the original quotes you selected. As you're kind of planning your essay and you're kind of picking out quotes, they're going to seem so important and so great, but once you start putting your essay together and filling it in with all the important stuff, that quote may not be great and it may not work there. And so move on, go find something else, okay? And so you don't have to keep it, and often it'll become irrelevant. So make sure that all of your evidence, whether it's a quote or a summary, helps prove your thesis statement. That means if it doesn't work, you need to go back and find something that does, okay? And also, and most importantly, don't be a hit and run quoter, okay? Follow the 3 rules. Set it up, use it, and explain it. And then we have how much explaining is too much, okay? The golden rule is that too much explanation is always better than not enough. And also, the more complicated the passage, the more analysis explanation is needed. And then this is the thing that you need to remember, is your analysis should be at least as long as the quote you provide. That means that if you're going to give me a 5-line block quote, you need to be ready to explain it, okay, at length for at least 5 lines. And then your new best friends. I've sent you guys a few times this semester to the Purdue Writing Lab, and so please continue to do that. We are citing an MLA, okay, that's the Modern Language Association. We are not citing an APA, so always know that the way that I'm expecting you to learn in-text citations, works cited pages, and quote integration is via MLA, okay? They will also tell you how to use in-text citations and the works cited page. However, as much as I want to say you need to memorize how to cite a magazine article or a website or whatever, that seems pretty tyrannical. So let me just get you to a good works cited generator, and that's easybib.com. There are a number of works cited page generators out there, and easybib.com is the one that I have found to be the most accurate. So please, if you're going to use a generator, use easybib.com and use it right. So if you have any questions about how to use it, you can set up a Skype session with me and I'd be happy to walk you through it. So now you know, now you have to in-text citation, you have to, everything, all of your reading and writing assignments, everything needs a works cited page if you're using sources, okay? That includes the sources I give you. So just be on the lookout now that is Bible for the rest of the semester. And just always remember that you have to let the evidence speak for itself, okay? What the quote means to you is rarely what it means to the reader. So make sure you are, that's a weird out of place slide, so just ignore that slide. And there you go. If you have any questions, let me know.